That which happened in Weymouth during the dark month of February 1645 could, had it have turned out differently, change the history of England as we know it. A plot by certain townspeople, supporters of the King, Charles I, which was months in the planning, came to fruition at midnight one dark, freezing February night, but was only half successful. Their plan was to surprise, with the connivance of other royalists in Dorset, the two main forts on the Weymouth side, at the Noath and the Chapelhay Heights, while simultaneously attacking and taking the twin port of Melcombe. The forts on the Weymouth side were easily overrun, but the force from Sherborne, who were supposed to complete the plan by taking Melcombe, did not show up until the next day. And by then, the parliamentarian commander of the twin towns, Colonel William Sydenham, had got most of his 900 men into Melcombe and secured the town, setting in motion an almost week-long internecine artillery battle which caused great damage in both communities. And when, about 2 weeks later, the archetypal Cavalier General in the shape of George Lord Goring appeared on the scene with several thousand more royalist soldiers, the fate of Colonel William Sydenham and his men seemed sealed, outnumbered as they were by 6-1. But underestimating Colonel William Sydenham, the eldest son of a Dorset landowner, was Goring's biggest mistake. Goring took himself off to Dorchester, secure in his own mind that he could take on and beat Sydenham at his leisure. But Sydenham had, a few days after Goring's arrival, attacked and retaken Weymouth, and now had the two towns to defend with his meagre force of loyal soldiers. Goring was outraged by Sydenham's impudence and attacked both towns at midnight on the 27th of February 1645, with several thousand of his men pouring into Weymouth down the old dark high street. Sure of an easy victory, Goring's battle-hardened men marched onwards, meeting little resistance, until upon reaching the eastern end of the street near the present Weymouth Bridge, all hell broke loose. Sydenham had set up a deadly ambush with at least 2 cannon and countless musketeers who were stationed at every window, rooftop and doorway. They poured a withering wall of deadly lead shot and iron ball into the royalist ranks. Confusion reigned in the enveloping darkness, and the stench of black powder and blood hung thick in the chilled night air. The numerous royalist dead and wounded at the front of the advance were trampled underfoot by their stumbling comrades, who were still streaming down from the other end of the street in large numbers. If not oblivious to what had occurred, then certainly not realizing the extent of the disaster and the slaughter on their side. Not content with this carnage, Sydenham's Dorset soldiers then drew their swords and upended their muskets to use as clubs and rushed to get to grips with Goring's men at close quarters. A deadly hand-to-hand struggle developed as the royalists fought desperately to extricate themselves from the trap. Eventually Goring's men broke and ran, Sydenham's troops chasing them back up the old high street and all the way out of Weymouth town. And worse was to follow for the King's side on that fateful night. 250 Irish royalist soldiers who had held the Noath fort for all of that month had now fought their way into Weymouth, hoping to link up with Goring's men. But instead, they saw Sydenham's triumphant soldiers rushing towards them with their blood up. The Irish turned and ran back along Weymouth quayside, hoping to reach their own fort on the Noath. But in those days, the area which is now the solid ground between Trinity Street, near the old Rooms Inn, through to Hope Square at Brewer's Quay, was then nothing more than an inlet filled with cold, deep water, known locally as the Hole. In the frosty darkness of the small hours, and gripped with blind panic due to the ferocity of Sydenham's charge, most of the luckless Irishmen blundered into, or else were driven straight over the quayside and into the icy February waters below, where those that didn't drown were easy prey for the Roundheads' pikes and muskets. As many as 250 souls perished in a few grisly minutes. Colonel Sydenham's horse was literally shot and killed beneath him as the chase ensued and turned to carnage for the men from County Clare. The Battle of Weymouth was over, with almost 500 people lying dead in the streets or floating in the cold waters of Weymouth Quay. And a new English hero, a new name was now on the lips of everyone. That of Colonel William Sydenham of Wingford Eagle in Dorset. About this time of year, strange apparitions from the time of the English Civil War have been seen in the twin boroughs. Sounds of battles, sounds of people just walking. Elizabeth Barnes was one such apparition.
Used to sit me on her knee and tell me all about when the great Armada sailed by here in the time of old Queen Bess, and how God in all his great mercy helped us to beat them, even though our ships were outnumbered by a fearful amount, and how he sent a great storm to scatter them. She told me how afraid all the people was, and how everyone was afeard that a great Spanish army would land in Weymouth and Morecambe and force us to take up papist ways after they robbed us blind of all our possessions. All my life I thought there'd be nothing worse than that, nothing more fearful. But I were wrong. This last month, I've seen things that no Christian woman should have to see. And all brought about by folk we knew too. Folks we grew up with and trusted. They hatched a plot to overthrow the governor, Colonel Sydenham, to kill him and his soldiers, and to take back the twin towns for the king. They say that the king wanted to bring in a big French army full of murdering papists, just like them Spanish did, and that they would help him with the war against the Parliament, and then, we'd all be made to worship God in papist ways, just like his wife, the French Queen, does. Lots of houses were hit with cannonballs during the fighting, and some have fallen down as them Roundheads and Cavaliers quarrelled with each other over the waters of the quays for nigh on a week of terrible bombardment. And finally, a few nights ago, a great and bloody battle took place in the streets of Weymouth. Lord Goring himself, at the head of a great Cavalier army, attacked Colonel Sydenham. And old Goring had 6 times as many soldiers, so they say. But Colonel Sydenham was too clever for him, and trapped and killed hundreds of his men in the old Weymouth High Street, which ran red with their blood. And hundreds more be drowned in the quay too. All Irish Catholics, so they say. They're still washing up now from time to time, as the sea don't want 'em, them being papists and all. And many of those we knew and grew up with are dead and gone. Some of them, the conspirators who started it all, was hanged by the Colonel up on the North Gibbet. And they still celebrate that, as they will tomorrow. And you can go and see it in Brewers Quay. 'Twas them that caused his brother, the brave young Major Francis Sydenham, to be killed when the fighting first started. Anyways, it's all gone quiet now. Goring has fled. He's fled the country with his tail between his legs. He marched to Somerset to try his luck there. And all that's left to us here in the towns is to try and pick up our lives. Try and pick up our lives to where they were before the conspiracy wreaked such havoc upon us. 'Tis funny how life repeats itself, isn't it? People are feared as one another and one army or another disrupts their lives, destroys their property. How them with the bigger numbers don't always win the fight. And how them that's spared, then chosen by God to carry on, get to tell the young uns all about it. Except now, I won't be able to sit my little granddaughter on my knee and tell her all about the fear we had during this war and the hardship we suffered. She's been taken, you see. Her and her mother, my only daughter Mary, both carried off by a cannonball outside their own house as she cradled her in her arms. Them both with God now, seated at his side. Oh yes, history repeats itself quite often. Soldiers, wars, kings, but it's always the people that suffer most. But the storm which sunk Lord Goring weren't made of wind. It weren't made of wind, rain and tide. It were made of Dorset flesh, bone and blood.